Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards in the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Sea Chart. This is a 3-cost action card from 2nd edition Seaside, and it says, +1 card, +1 action, reveal the top card of your deck, put it into your hand if you have a copy of it in play. So Sea Chart is a cantrip, gives you +1 card, +1 action, but sometimes it also might be a laboratory as well. Now, getting a laboratory effect for just a card costing 3 is really good. Of course, laboratory costs 5. 3 is very different in price range. Problem is, of course, that it's not guaranteed. Sea Chart can be inconsistent in this regard. The good news is, though, is that you can try and build your deck to maximise the chances of Sea Chart working, in which case, if you can do that, this is cheap laboratory, which is really nice. So how Sea Chart works is that it kind of wants you to have as many different cards in play before you play your Sea Chart. This maximises the chance that it will reveal a card that you have a copy of in play. Now, the vast majority of the time, Sea Chart's only going to be played during the action phase, and that means that if you reveal a treasure, it's not going to draw you that extra card. It will just be a cantrip in that case. Similarly, pure victory cards like Duchy being revealed will also cause it to fail. Now, there are exceptions to this. Sometimes you can have treasures already in play with stuff like Astrolabe, which is a duration treasure. If you played on the last turn, your Sea Charts this turn will actually be able to draw every Astrolabe that they hit. Similarly, sometimes you have ways to play treasures in the action phase. We've talked about these before in other videos, but stuff like Storyteller is probably the big one for working with Sea Chart, and that would then make drawing treasures possible as well once you've played the Storyteller and put them in play. Most of the time, however, Sea Chart just simply wants you to have a deck that's very, very low on anything other than action cards. It wants some very high action density. So you're going to be looking for ways to trash all of those starting estates and coppers, but also you want to have actions be the source of payload as well. So you want to look for action cards that are giving you money, that sort of thing. Now, being in Seaside, Sea Chart, the reason why it's in Seaside, is because it also has sort of a synergy with the main gimmick of Seaside, which is duration cards. Duration cards stay in play between turns, and that means that at the start of your turn, Sea Chart's already able to work if it reveals a copy of them from your deck. You didn't have to play the card before playing the Sea Chart. Of course, on the flip side, there are cards that basically almost never enter play without playing them as a way first. So cards like Horse, Acting Troupe, Wine Merchant, these are all cards that basically leave play the second you play them. And Sea Chart is worse in decks filled with these. It just can't draw these cards. Especially with something like Horse, it's possible to gain a lot of horses sometimes. Your Sea Charts just aren't really going to be working if they're just hitting Horse all the time. So do be careful with that. Of course, if you've got a lot of horses, maybe you don't even need the Sea Charts, right? You want to be very careful with the order in which you play cards when you're trying to draw with Sea Chart. What's really important is that you try to get at least one copy of every other type of card in your deck in play, ideally, before you play the Sea Charts. So typically I find I tend to play the Sea Charts last in my turn, or at least as late as possible, when it's not really feasible to play any other action card. Instead, that's when I'm going to start playing the Sea Charts. Normally there are some cards that you're really looking to play last, stuff like your bridges or whatever, your terminal payload cards that aren't drawing you. But in the case of Sea Chart, you want to try and find a way, if possible, to maybe play one of those earlier in the turn in advance. You do have to watch out if you've also got terminal draw as well. Normally you're saving your actions to play those first, but with Sea Chart it is worth trying to get some of the other ones in play first, and that just means then Sea Chart can start drawing when it reveals more of those types of cards from your deck. It becomes a lot easier to draw with Sea Chart when there's less variety in your deck and you've got a smaller number of differently named cards, but in larger quantities. Some cards you can get where your strategy is just to play the same cards really over and over again. So stuff like Bridge, where the aim is to just play as many as you can. Even stuff like Festival or Conspirator. These are sorts of decks where, you might just have one type of card making up a large chunk of it. And C chart makes it a lot easier to draw with these because sometimes you can just find one of those very quickly, get it in play, and from now on your C chart's just very, very likely to hit every other card like in your deck. Like it starts to work with them and it draws better. It's worth noting one really important card when we talk about having lots of one type of card is C chart itself. The nice thing about C chart is that in order to play it, C chart enters play. That means that C chart is almost always guaranteed to work if it reveals another C chart. There are exceptions for stuff like command cards. If you played a C chart with Overlord, then you might not actually have a C chart in play, but then, you start drawing all the Overlords instead when they're revealed. So it's going to be more likely stuff like Inheritance, where this might be a problem, where you have C charts and estates in your deck, and they're sort of doing the same thing. You've inherited C chart, but they're technically different cards. For the most part, C chart effectively has a lot of self-synergy. Gaining lots and lots of C charts makes it a lot easier to draw with C chart because of this, because it's like the one card that's almost always basically guaranteed to work when you reveal it. So what you want to do is you want to look for boards where gaining lots and lots of cheap action cards is easy, stuff like Ironworks. That's going to make it very easy to just pile in lots and lots of C charts. C charts really good when you get lots of them, effectively. Now, the major issue with using C chart as draw is the fact that it doesn't really work early. And when I say early, I do mean in both senses of the term here, both in terms of the start of your turn and also at the start of the game. So early in your turn, you just simply don't have very many cards in play. And you might need to start using other draw cards just so that you can find other cards to play before you start playing all your C charts. Because right at the start of your turn, C chart doesn't really work, is the problem. Yeah, if you find other C charts, that's fine, but if you haven't played any other card, it whiffs on everything else. That's really bad. So you might simply just have to start playing other draw cards and have them just so you can find like a copy of the other cards so you can put them in play and then start playing the C chart. Similarly, early on in the game, your deck simply doesn't have enough action density for C chart to work, right? You start the game usually with no action cards at all, right? Just 7 coppers and 3 estates. C chart doesn't work when it hits any of those. So you just can't start using C chart early in the game. There's just nothing for it to hit and actually draw with. So typically draw is a lot better earlier on. You really want to be drawing more cards at the start of your turn in order to find like the cards that need to be paired up and like the things that really help you kick off your turn. And similarly, early on in the game, cycling very quickly, drawing a lot of cards, lets you buy more expensive stuff earlier, lets you play those critical early gains more often. C chart doesn't really do either of these things, unfortunately. It is a very late game draw card. Now, as with other cards, like the other conditional laboratories, stuff like Wishing Well, Magpie, Herald, that sort of stuff, C chart benefits from deck inspection to remove all of the risk involved. Instead of flipping over a random card, you might get to just see what that card is and know when's the right time to play C chart. So stuff like Patrol, Cartographer, Wandering Minstrel, these cards let you look ahead in your deck by multiple cards, and they actually let you rearrange them as well sometimes, which lets you put exactly the right card in play, so you can just guarantee the C chart hit and make sure that it is a laboratory. These synergies are basically exactly the same as all the other stuff. So like in, for example, the Wishing Well video, we've basically already covered this already, so I'm not really going to go into too much detail with it, but it's pretty much the same synergies. Now it is worth noting that C chart does not reveal the top card of your deck from before you play it. It's actually the second card in. This means that stuff that top decks, like say Courtyard, does not work. It is not enough to already know the top card of your deck. You do need to know the second one. This is the same as a lot of these other cards that follow, stuff like Wishing Well. So that's a lot of discussion about like what works with C chart, but from a high level view, how good actually is C chart? When do we want to add this to our deck? Well, this is a non-terminal draw card, and non-terminal draw is generally very, very good. You can slot it into a lot of decks easily and not really harm your deck. But Sea Chart, unfortunately, tends to be ineffective until quite late. Again, both in terms of the start of the game and the start of your turn. In order to keep up good tempo and get your deck built effectively, you usually need to start prioritizing other forms of draw first, right? You want to be looking to other sources of draw because you just can't use Sea Chart otherwise, until your deck's already there. It can become very effective. You can get extremely high odds of actually drawing with Sea Chart and making it, very consistently, like a laboratory, once your deck is already mostly under control anyway. Now, of course, the problem there is that if your deck's already under control, how much more extra draw do you really need? I mean, you're already there, right? If we're already drawing our whole deck, how much do we actually want Sea Charts? Well, one nice thing about Sea Chart is that it does offer you an alternative and honestly fairly cheap way to try and add more draw into your deck once you're already in that situation. And actually focus on adding other things like payload or victory cards or whatever without that much extra support, right? You don't need to be looking to get something as hard as laboratories or a village terminal draw pair or whatever. You just add in one Sea Chart very cheap, and that will cover basically another stock card from that point on. Decks that get under control very quickly, and that can also gain a lot of cheap cards, they have multiple workshops and stuff. They're sort of the ideal scenario for Sea Chart, right? You get your deck thin and under control, you can add in the Sea Charts to help improve your deck from that point on and do so very effectively. If you're adding it before then what you find is that the Sea Charts that you're adding might simply just be do-nothing cantrips. I mean, you're not really building your deck effectively at that point. So just some final miscellaneous points. Sea Chart, I'd say, is a fairly average card. It's probably somewhere in the middle of the pack, power-wise, amongst all cards. It's neither super good, but also it's not bad either. It's just fairly average in my experience. When this card was first revealed, there were lots of comparisons people were straight away making to Wishing Well, and and it does share synergies with those, stuff like the deck inspection and all that. However, it is worth noting that cards like Wishing Well are very different from Sea Chart. Wishing Well starts off good. It's a card that you tend to open with and guess copper, and start getting that early cycling, but then tends to get worse over time as you're less likely to guess. Sea Chart's the complete opposite of this. Sea Chart is not a card that you open with at all. Do not open with Sea Chart. It just won't work. It will just be like opening nothing and skipping your early buy. But later on, it is consistently like a 3-cost laboratory, which is very good. It is very hard to rely on Sea Chart as the only draw, in my experience, unless your deck gets really thin pretty well. So we have talked before, a long time ago we talked, since we've talked about this, but stuff like Cantrip Kingdoms, maybe it's a game where you've got markets and merchants, and you don't really have any other sort of draw, and you're just playing these cards over and over again. These sorts of cards are nice with stuff like Sea Chart because they're very easy to play in any order. As soon as you draw a new type of them, you can just play it straight away because they're all giving you +1 action. And then, the Sea Charts are a nice cheap way of adding in a bit of extra draw, which you're going to need because at some point you're going to be throwing in stuff like provinces. The problem with Cantrip Kingdoms is that they choke really hard on stock cards. So Sea Chart very, very easily just gives you ways to add a little bit of draw to support those extra stock cards. I mean, Cantrip Kingdoms aren't the only thing, but that's sort of the super example of a very, very thin, deck that doesn't have much draw, that has a lot of action density. Sea Chart really likes that sort of thing, and the fact that it's so cheap, works really well in that case. So that's really all that I have to say about Sea Chart. So what we're going to do is we are going to head over to the online client and we are going to generate some random kingdoms with Sea Chart in it. And we're going to see how useful it is, at least how useful we think it is. Special setup here is just Potion, and that is because we have Vineyard. So what have we got? Well, we've got Mining Village, Native Village, Diplomat, and Nobles, all as villages. There's a lot of villages. The only draw is Nobles and Moat and Diplomat. Well, that's actually fine. There is Bridge for a Bridge Mega Turn, and there's Vineyard for lots of action cards. Well, that all sounds great. But there is one problem here. There is no trashing at all. There's Bandit for golds, there's Philosopher's Stone, which sounds terrible. So the problem is how good actually is the engine. You really can't draw very well, is massive issue here. Diplomat is not getting low hand sizes. Technically, you could start your turn with a nobles or a native village, and then like your diplomat can be a village, but otherwise, like, the draw is very hard. And that's just because, it's really hard. There's no like extra gainers to get like mining villages to pair up with your nobles for draw, and you've just got all this junk in your deck. For that reason, there's so many villages and just crap draw cards. Moat, diplomat, wow. What do you even do? Like, the village draw stuff really doesn't feel very effective at all. But you also don't really want to be doing like Philosopher's Stone stuff, right? I mean, what's the alternative? Bridge, Philosopher's Stone, Bandit. Like, doesn't that sound horrible? And the engine does have like Nobles and Vineyard if it really wants to try, but I think it's just going to struggle. I think we just want to spike to provinces. In that regard, Bandit's nice. We might have actually finally found the Philosopher's Stone board. Like, honestly, I think we might be here, where you literally just go Philosopher's Stone money, like with the Bandit and bridges. And the bridges you only for buying extra coppers to make Philosopher's Stone a bit better. That really doesn't sound very good. But, I mean, what else are you doing? Like, Sea Chart is basically terrible here, unfortunately. There's just too many non-action cards. Like, it's really hard. If you try and go for the engine, Sea Chart is missing most of the time. And I just don't feel like you can build your deck fast enough, even though, there is the promise of stuff like Bridge and Vineyard, right? And, with all these bridges, you can just buy and throw a load of Sea Charts into your deck. But, like, it just misses a lot. But at the same time, like, the alternative is just like Bandit and Philosopher's Stone, which is just awful. It just doesn't work. Given that there's Bridge and you can add a ton of Sea Charts, and there's Vineyard, like, it does make me wonder how viable, and you get points from Nobles as well. Like, I actually genuinely can't tell if the engine is good enough here. Like, it doesn't feel good. It really doesn't feel good at all. But, like, there's just no good way of, like, spiking 8s easily. Like, there's just no good draw. Like, what about something like, well, Nobles money is bad because you want to be buying golds and not Nobles. But, like, that sort of thing can work. Because the thing is, if you go for the engine, then you will eventually probably get some Sea Charts just under the expectation that they're going to miss. It's just you have spare buys. But even then, is that so good, right? There's stuff like Native Village Bridge as well, right? Like, you do have the chance with stuff like Sea Chart to actually reveal your junk and then use a native village to set them aside. So you've actually got pseudo-trashing. And for that reason, okay, that makes me think that actually the engine is going to work after all. It takes a while to get there, but you can hilariously use Sea Chart specifically to target junk for native village, which is an interesting use. But is that good? You know what? Given that we have Vineyard and Bridge and Nobles, I think that's going to win. So actually, ironically, Sea Chart is fine here. You are able to get your action density up a bit. The problem is that, like, well, I was going to say there's no action money, but that's not true. There's Bridge, which is very good. And you can get... The thing is, you don't really want a lot of native villages. You really want stuff like Mining Village instead. Yeah, you know what? I think we can do the engine. So, yeah, Sea Chart's actually fine here. It's not spectacular, but it's pretty good, and we can get a load of them cheaply with Bridge. The uncontested engine can get quite a lot of them, and I think they can shift into Vineyards and actually win. But, there are I don't know, the non-engine just doesn't feel very good. There's just no realistic draw for it is the main problem. Bandit's really not that good. Philosopher's Stone's really terrible as well, just truly terrible. I just don't think it's going to be fast enough. Like, what are they going to do? They have to go for like 8 provinces. It's not going to happen, right? And there's enough points for like Vineyard and Nobles long term for the engine player to just beat provinces. So, okay, I think we go for the engine. I think we do get Sea Chart. You don't really want it early. You do really want to be getting the Nobles, the mining villages, the bridges, and then you can start picking up native villages and sea charts, I guess, and just hope that slowly over time you eventually make the engine work. You just got a long time to build. But yeah, it's a tricky one, that. Okay, what have we got here next? There are no special setup here. And we have no village. That's a little bit worrying. We've got Lookout for trashing. We've got Mint for trashing. There's also Mine. There is Witch for cursing. Witch seems like the terminal of choice here. Curses are very bad. We've got both Sea Chart and Wishing Well. These help stuff like Lookout, both of these cards. Our aim is to junk our opponent a lot with Witch. That's really what we want to do. We want to get up there as fast as possible. I don't think we open Lookout. It really hurts. There is like a workshop to gain Sea Chart and Wishing Well, but I really don't like that. I don't like Lurker here either. I do just want to do like Witch Big Money. Maybe a Lookout can be added later. But I think adding one early hurts too much your chances to get at Witch. Is Mine good? No, not really. But, you have got time, but I don't think you get to play Mine often enough is the problem, because your deck's not very thin. I don't think we don't Sea Chart here at all, basically. There's no engine. You're not actually playing with that many action cards, so this is just a big no for Sea Chart. Okay, what do we got next? Another potion game. That's because we've got Scrying Pool in this kingdom. Still no colonies or anything, though. Let's see here. Well, Scrying Pool is exceptionally good draw if we can get thin. Do we have any trashing? We do not. That's pretty bad for Scrying Pool. There's an Ironworks with a load of cheap cards. There's Monument, there's Caravan, there's Cut Purse, Sea Chart. There's Native Village as a village, and there's Torturer as other draw as well. Well, Torturer's very good attack here. With no trashing, curses really hurt. And the discard attack really hurts as well, actually. What I would like to do, I'd probably open Cut Purse to stop my opponent getting Torturers, and you really want to be doing like Torturer Native Village at first. I know that's rough. We open Cut Purse and then we get an Ironworks later, and we actually take a little while until we go into something like Scrying Pool. Do we ever go into Scrying Pool? Maybe Scrying Pool's just bad here, and it's not good enough. I really just want to be playing Torturers, and then later on you could have stuff like Monument, but honestly there's also stuff like Caravans and Horde as well. Just get a bunch of money. Native Village is not a great action card to pair with Torturer, but you do what you can. I would rather be getting Caravans over Sea Chart initially, that's for sure. So I think we try and do a Torturer engine just because the attack is brutal here. Or we ignore stuff like Scrying Pool, there's no action density, and as a result, we kind of ignore Sea Chart as well. But once the Caravans run out, I can pick up Sea Charts with Ironworks, right? Not a big deal. I do think I like Horde. You have a Torturer engine with a Horde, and you're actually just going for a lot of treasures. I think that's fine. I guess technically flooding yourself with golds is not great for playing a lot of Torturers, but the aim is to play a bunch of Torturers first, get the attacks in. When your opponent has some curses, then it's time to shift over to buying golds. You're going to have a lot of time because their deck's going to be absolutely terrible with no trashing here. And Sea Chart just isn't really a factor here at all. I just don't think it's ever really worth getting, unless you happen to have an Ironworks, and fine, buy a Sea Chart, right, gain one. But no, even, it can find Caravans a bit more likely as well, but it's not very good here, I don't think. It's not really a Sea Chart board. The engine's too difficult. Okay, another potion game, and no colonies again. what do we have? We have straight away, I see Sentry for trashing. That's also like deck inspection. So straight away, that looks really nice for C chart. There's also expand as well. There is no village. There's Apothecary is like massive deck inspection, but I don't like Apothecary here, I don't think. With no village, what are we actually doing? Well, there is Conspirator. I notice there's no plus buy. So what we could do is we can play Sentry, get thin, have Conspirators and C charts, and potentially like there's Wishing Well again. So you can get Conspirators kicked off, you can draw up to 8, and then your one terminal can be expand. The other alternative is Monument, which is also nice, but expand is pretty nice as well. I mean, well, what are we expanding really? Not much, honestly. Like, we're not really gaining expandable cards. We want to trash a lot with Sentry. We do want some Sentries to make kicking off a Conspirator easy. I think this is just a Conspirator up to 8. And honestly, I'm probably just playing a single Monument. So I'm going to open Monument. And why not Wishing Well? Right, Monument, Wishing Well, and a 4-3. If it's a 5-2, obviously it's Sentry. And we're just going to go for Sentry, Conspirators, C charts, Wishing Wells, 1 Monument. I think that's the deck. And the Secret Passage as well, which, helps with C chart and Wishing Well. But the problem is that you only want to build so far. Expand technically allows you to mill provinces, which is really nice, but that's sort of the only thing that you're really going to be trashing with it. I guess technically you could turn a Sentry towards the end of the game into a province, but I think Monument is probably just nicer, to be honest. I think it's easier to win, tie breaks. You should get set up fairly quickly here, I think. You just got to make sure you get enough Conspirators. I only need 3, really. I think you can fairly consistently, even with some victory cards, get through your deck. This is sort of more of a Cantrip Kingdom kind of thing going on, and that's where Wishing Well and C chart are going to work out okay, especially when you've got a Sentry and maybe stuff like Secret Passage to help out. So Wishing Well's probably just as fine as C chart. C chart's going to be better later, Wishing Well better earlier. They're sort of interchangeable here. I think even though they're very different cards, you just sort of have the one that you want. They're hard to gain later on because there's no buys or extra gains. Oh, and right, there's the recent errata message. Right, Herbalist has changed somehow. Well, whatever. Oops, that's actually started a game. Never mind. What have we got? No special setup here. All right, enough distractions there. Let's see. Is there a village? No, there is not. There is Apprentice for draw, and there's also Upgrade for trashing. So there's both of those. Are there any extra gains? No, there is Treasure Map. Technically, there's Herbalist for an extra buy. There's a Tactician for an extra buy. But we can't really do double Tactician because there's no money. You could single Tactician, I guess. Apprentice also doesn't look very good because what are we gaining? Oh, there's Tiara for extra buy. Who cares about Herbalist, right? So what are we doing here? Swindler seems nice. Is this just Swindler money? We have an upgrade, I think, because we're going to get cursed with Swindler, and that seems like the best way of dealing with those. And, we get to turn our estates into, honestly, Warehouse is also fine, but also silvers. And I think it's just money otherwise. You know what? A Tactician might fit in there as well at some point. Single Tactician. Even Tiara is okay if we're going to be getting a bunch of silvers and golds eventually. But this is mostly a money deck. There's Swindler, there's Upgrade, there's Warehouse, there's maybe a Tactician, Tiara. These are the sorts of cards we're looking at. And C chart's just completely terrible here. We're just not getting it at all. Swindler is fine. You're probably going to end up with a bunch of swindlers as people swindle things into swindlers, Yeah, so I guess it's just Swindler money with some other stuff. So C chart's pretty useless here. So I think in the end, that was... C chart was definitely the engine game. We had ones where it was pretty good, where it was having the extra draw was fine, but there's also a bunch of games there where C chart just wasn't really doing anything. Anyway, I hope this was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.